Welcome to Enchanted Lore. You look like you have 99 problems. Your cat bites you after you've pet it 3 times. Your bank accounts look like they're a little low on funds. And your washer keeps breaking for some reason. I'll tell you what, we can't help you with any of that. But what we can help you with is some various pacing problems, and we'll give you some solutions. Let's begin. For the first problem that we want to talk about is that of the players sometimes getting stuck in kind of an RP loop where they are unable to make a decision, choose a path in which they want to go, and what have you. And sometimes it can work itself out. But other times, you need to use these different solutions as a GM to give them a simple push and to guide them into making a decision. One of the solutions is where we introduce a sense of urgency. For example, maybe they're discussing a matter in front of the bartender, and he looks nervously at the door, and he's like, "Are you going to do something quick? Because the guards are coming." There, now you have introduced a sense of urgency that they need to make a decision and move on. Another solution is similar to this one, is where you have the NPC just take control of the conversation. So you might have where they're discussing the situation, trying to plan, and then the noble sighs and rolling her eyes, and she says, "Enough talk! Do you accept my offer or not?" Right there, you have the NPC forcing them to make a decision. End of discussion, we have to go. Moving on, and stuff like that. Next solution is introduce a consequence for delaying. Once again, there's a reasonable amount of time, and there's situations, some RP sessions, I have them where they RP longer and have more freedom to investigate and stuff. But other situations is where it is of a more sensitive nature and they can't just sit and chat. Well, the consequence for delaying could be where, something bad happens. You knew this timer was ticking away, whether you notify them by the actual clock, whether you notify them by the number of rounds, but whatever it is, they've run out of time, and now the consequence happens. Prime example would be where, the villain has been performing a ritual and they've been lollygagging or haven't been made the decision on how they're going to approach or cancel or defeat the guy, and he casts his dark magics. And now we've entered into combat and the bad thing begins to happen. So that is another way where you can just force them to kind of break this loop of indecision and guide them to the next step. Now for problem number 2, and that's where perhaps the players tend to dive in too deep and ask too many details before making a decision. Once again, this is another one of those very subjective sort of situations, right? There are times when some of my players really like to go in and learn about the lore and just deep dive into things and research and just, embrace it. But there's other times when it is not appropriate, whether they do not have the proper time, they do not have the proper skills or spells or what have you. And so instead of them just taking the whole session to try to research and talk to all these people and stuff, just give them a couple details and then present them with the decisions that they have to make, right? A simple example of this might be where you just don't go into all the details of everything is where maybe they're going through a dungeon, right? And there are 2 doors. The door on the right, if they touch it, it feels hot, and it has kind of a weird smell, coming from it. And the door to the left is kind of cool and normal to the touch. Then perhaps, in this sort of situation, you've presented enough information that they know oh, hey, well, perhaps this demon or fire elemental or whatever we're going in this kind of scenario is probably a door over here. This other one is a diversion. It's a trap and stuff like that. And so you present on, you give little pieces of information, but you don't have to go and be like, oh yes, the door was crafted, thousands of years. If it's not applicable, don't do it. Give them key details, move on. Now for problem number 3. And that's where we talk about like just fights and combat that just drag on and on. It's just you picked a monster and either the dice are just not in the player's favor, or you made a homebrew and you had certain things and it's just not working out to where it is just a slow and boring slugfest. You hit, they hit, you bullet back and forth and back and forth. And there's just nothing to achieve from this other than just to waste time. Now, like I said, there's certain use cases where this is appropriate. You're maybe trying to deplete their resources. Maybe you're trying to make it feel like, hey, this is really big and powerful and a challenge. And there's different times when something like that would be appropriate. But for generally speaking, if there's just like where you're just trading back and forth, and there's no excitement, it's just you're just seeing dice roll, then perhaps you should go and reduce the HP of the monster. Cut it down, sure, maybe initially you're like, hey, this is a 500 HP monster, but this take too long. I, as the GM behind the screen, scratch, boom, he's now 300. The next 2 hits, he's down. Congratulations, hurrah, victory. Or you can have where you give them alternate like win conditions, right? Perhaps what they did was in this fight, if there's multiple creatures here, they defeated the guy that was the leader. Boom. Now the rest of them flee. They don't have to necessarily fight to the death all the time. You can mix it up, add some variety, and just sometimes battles can be just quick skirmishes, quick conflicts, and move on. Now for problem number 4. And that is where players are taking too long on their turns. And this usually you could kind of see a bit happen during combat, right? And the way that I get around that is by a couple different ways. One, you can see this happen where sometimes this happens where they're not prepared for their turn. And this could be because, hey, something that they were planning to do happened or changed. Maybe the wizard was going to cast a spell to go hit this bad guy in the back, but the guy in the back got eliminated. Does he really want to use this other spell because, it's going to hit allies and stuff. So what you do is kindly temporarily skip them if they need a little bit more time. Offer it in a kind way. If they need a little bit of time, if it's taking too long or they're kind of stumbling, say, hey, take a few minutes. Let me do this and we will get back to you, right? And stuff like that. And you don't have to be mean about it. Be nice. And it's just one of those things. They'll appreciate the little time and then they can adjust and you can continue and stuff. The other way is what I like to do for fun is quick time sort of events / decisions, right? So maybe if something's happening and they're taking kind of long, I initiate an immediate decision, kind of like a moral decision sort of thing, right? Where, hey, sure, it's your turn. You could do your normal turn in which maybe you do combat or something, but you see that, boom, this happens. Are you going to go and maybe try to take the hit for your buddy, cancel, do something, push them out of the way, which then eliminates your turn, but it saves them, or not, right? Maybe you let them take the hit or get run over and you focus on the boss. So sometimes introducing some variety and that kind of spices things up and just kind of helps if they're struggling on what to do and just giving them something different to focus on. So now for the bonus round, and that is, what about the problem about sessions just not having the momentum for another session, and the solution for that is ending on a strong note. You make the players leave where they're excited to return, to come back for more. One of the strategies that me and my friends tend to do is either leave it on kind of a cliffhanger sort of thing, or where there is this good set off, the set situation where we set it up and this is a good breaking point, right? We don't like to break in the middle of combat, and that does happen, but we prefer not to do that. But let's say, an example, you open the door and there you see this mage who's been tormenting you, and he says, it's nice to see you here. And then you end the session, and they're like, oh no, you can't just end up being like, yeah, our time's up, guys. Well, we can continue and see how you guys deal with this guy next week, or it's just different situations like that. Or we're like, hey, where I had recently, the players, they went and they had their schemes starting to be set in motions and stuff like that. Are they going to go and assassinate the king? Are they going to make a deal with the king? All these little webs, they're starting to take place. And then be like, okay, good job in all your planning, but we'll have to wait till next week and stuff like that to see who ends up being the right, who ends up being wrong, And you have that where you keep the momentum, you keep the feeling, and it's just everybody's excited and stuff. So we hope you enjoyed this video and that it helped provide some solutions for you. I'd like to see what are some of the problems you've encountered and how did you solve it. So that's it for today, and thank you for watching.